The Rockefeller Dynasty. What if one family didn't just build wealth, but quietly shaped the modern world? From a single man with an idea to the most powerful oil empire in history. This is the story of how John D. Rockefeller didn't just become rich, he became untouchable. At one point, his company controlled 90% of America's oil. Not a business, a monopoly. But behind the billions were secret deals, ruthless strategies, and a system designed to eliminate anyone in the way. They said he was a genius. Others called him a predator. So how did one name rise from nothing to influence governments, industries, and generations? And more importantly, is the Rockefeller legacy really over, or is it still shaping your world today? This is the complete history of the Rockefeller Dynasty. In the summer of 1839, in the sleepy hamlet of Richford, upstate New York, a boy named John Davison Rockefeller entered the world. The air smelled of pine and fresh-turned earth. His mother, Eliza, a devout Baptist woman with iron will and quiet faith, prayed over him as he cried. His father, William Avery Big Bill Rockefeller, was nowhere to be found that day. Big Bill was a traveling snake oil salesman, a bigamist who peddled miracle cures and vanished for months at a time, leaving his family to scrape by on faith and grit. Young John learned early that life was a ledger. At age 7, he raised turkeys and sold them for profit. He kept a small blue notebook where he recorded every penny earned and spent a habit that would define an empire. By 12, the family had moved to Cleveland, Ohio, chasing opportunity in the booming Midwest. John attended school by day and worked as a clerk by night, his thin frame hunched over ledgers under gaslight. Cleveland in the 1850s was raw and ambitious. Canals, railroads, and the first whispers of black gold bubbling up from Pennsylvania wells. Kerosene was the future. Whale oil was expensive and messy. John saw it before most did. At 16, he dropped formal schooling for a 3-month bookkeeping course. He never looked back. In 1859, when Edwin Drake struck oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania, the frenzy began. John, barely 20, partnered with Morris Clark in a small produce commission business, but his eyes were on refining. Oil was chaotic wildcatters, explosions, waste everywhere. John hated waste. He believed in order, efficiency, and control. By 1863, with the Civil War raging, Rockefeller and Clark built their first refinery. It was modest, but John negotiated ruthlessly with railroads for rebates, volume discounts that smaller competitors couldn't match. He borrowed heavily but paid back religiously. I would rather earn 1% off 100 people's efforts than 100% of my own, he would later say. That philosophy built Standard Oil. The story of the Rockefeller rise is not just one of oil. It is the story of a boy who turned his father's absence into discipline, his mother's faith into moral armor, and America's chaotic energy boom into the most powerful monopoly the world had ever seen. Big Bill's shadow lingered. Rumors swirled that John's father was a con artist who once posed as a doctor selling cancer cures. John rarely spoke of him publicly, but privately he vowed his own life would be different, disciplined, upright, and generous in the eyes of God. Yet critics would later call him the devil incarnate for crushing competitors. In 1864, John married Laura Celestia Seti Spellman, a cultured, abolitionist-minded woman from a prominent Ohio family. Their union was a partnership of equals in faith and ambition. Together, they would raise 5 surviving children in a strict Baptist household where chores earned pennies and charity was non-negotiable. By 1870, at age 30, Rockefeller incorporated Standard Oil of Ohio with $1 million in capital, the largest corporation in the country at the time. His partners included his brother William and Henry Flagler, a brilliant marketer. They refined oil better, cheaper, and faster than anyone. They bought pipelines, barrel factories, and warehouses. They eliminated middlemen. John D. Rockefeller didn't invent oil, he organized it. He turned a dirty, dangerous, wasteful industry into a machine of precision. By 1877, Standard Oil controlled nearly 90% of American refining. The Octopus had tentacles everywhere, but power invites enemies. Small refiners cried foul. Newspapers painted Rockefeller as a robber baron squeezing the life out of honest businessmen. Ida Tarbell's later expose would call him ruthless. Yet to his workers he was often fair, paying decent wages and avoiding strikes that plagued other industries. The Gilded Age was brutal. Fortunes rose and fell overnight. Rockefeller survived panics, fires, and lawsuits by staying calm. He always tried to turn every disaster into an opportunity, he reflected. When competitors failed, he bought them, sometimes at fire sale prices, sometimes generously. By the 1880s, Standard Oil had become a trust, the first great American monopoly. It dictated prices, quality, and distribution. Railroads feared it. Politicians courted it, and John D. Rockefeller, still in his 40s, was on his way to becoming the richest man in history. He lived simply. No yachts, no palaces yet. He attended church every Sunday, taught Sunday school, and gave away dimes to children on the street. But his wealth grew exponentially. Adjusted for inflation, his peak fortune approached $400 billion in today's dollars, dwarfing modern tech billionaires. The boy from Richford had conquered oil. But the real story of the dynasty was just beginning, the transition from ruthless accumulation to calculated giving, from monopoly to moral legacy. The 1880s roared with industrial fury. America was transforming from farms to factories, and oil lit the lamps of progress. Standard Oil's blue barrels became symbols of reliability. Rockefeller's genius lay in vertical integration, controlling every step from well to consumer. He installed chemists to improve refining yield. He built the world's most efficient pipeline network. He negotiated secret rebates with railroads, a practice legal then but later vilified. Competitors accused him of predatory pricing, selling below cost in one market to bankrupt rivals, then raising prices. Rockefeller saw it differently. He believed competition was wasteful. The American beauty rose can be produced in the splendor and fragrance which bring cheer to its beholder only by sacrificing the early buds which grew up around it, he once explained. In his view, monopoly brought order and lower prices for consumers over time. The trust system allowed centralized control without full legal merger. Standard Oil Trust, formed in 1882, held shares of dozens of companies. It was brilliant, innovative, and, as the Supreme Court would later rule, illegal under emerging antitrust law. Scandals mounted. The 1872 Cleveland massacre saw Rockefeller buy out or crush 22 of 26 local refiners in months. Some called it brilliant strategy, others economic warfare. Yet Rockefeller insisted on quality. Standard Oil kerosene was safer and brighter. Exports boomed. By 1890, the company was a global force. Public backlash grew. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 targeted monopolies. Theodore Roosevelt's trust-busting era loomed. In 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil's breakup into 34 companies, including what would become Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, and others. David grew up in privilege, but with the same deliberate restraint that marked earlier generations. Summers at the family estate in Pocantico Hills, private tutors, and a strict Baptist moral framework formed his early character. He attended the progressive Lincoln School in New York, then Harvard, where he graduated in 1936. He earned a doctorate in economics from the University of Chicago in 1940, writing a thesis on unused resources and economic waste, a topic that echoed his grandfather's obsession with efficiency. A brief stint at the London School of Economics and a year at the Rockefeller Institute rounded out his formal education. World War I interrupted his banking career before it truly began. David enlisted as a private in the U.S. Army in 1942, rising to the rank of captain. He served in North Africa and Europe, working in military intelligence and later helping with post-war economic planning in France and Germany. The war deepened his belief in America's global responsibilities and the need for strong international institutions. It also gave him first-hand experience with the destruction that unchecked nationalism and economic chaos could cause. In 1946, David joined the Chase National Bank, the institution that would define his professional life. He started at the bottom, literally working as a Foreign Department trainee. His rise was steady and methodical. By 1961, he was president of what had become Chase Manhattan Bank. In 1969, he became chairman and CEO, a position he held until 1980. Under his leadership, Chase transformed from a major New York bank into one of the world's most international financial institutions. David opened branches and cultivated relationships across Latin America, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, often in places where American banks had been cautious. He was famous for his personal diplomacy. David traveled extensively, meeting heads of state, finance ministers, and business leaders. He developed close relationships with figures as diverse as Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, Mexican leaders, and Soviet officials during the Cold War. In 1973, he made a groundbreaking trip to China, helping normalize financial relations years before full diplomatic ties were restored. He believed that economic engagement could reduce political tensions and foster stability, a philosophy that guided much of his international work. David's global influence extended beyond banking. In 1949, he joined the Council on Foreign Relations, ChronoFun, eventually serving as chairman from 1970 to 1985. The ChronoFun, a nonpartisan think tank, became a central forum for debating U.S. foreign policy. David saw it as a place where serious minds from business, government, and academia could discuss complex issues away from electoral politics. Critics, however, viewed the ChronoFun as an elite club where powerful insiders shape policy behind closed doors. His most controversial initiative came in 1973 when he helped found the Trilateral Commission, bringing together influential figures from North America, Western Europe, and Japan. The commission aimed to promote closer cooperation among the world's leading industrialized democracies. David recruited Zbigniew Brzezinski as the first director and recruited members from politics, business, and academia. The goal was practical: to address shared economic and security challenges in a changing world. Supporters praised it as forward-thinking internationalism. Detractors saw it as an attempt to create a shadowy global elite network that bypassed democratic accountability. Conspiracy theories quickly attached themselves to the Trilateral Commission, with some claiming it was a stepping stone to one world government. David dismissed such accusations as paranoid, insisting the group was simply a forum for dialogue among allies. Throughout his career, David maintained the family tradition of philanthropy while adding a distinctly global dimension. He served on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation and supported its international health and agricultural programs. He was instrumental in the creation of the World Trade Center in New York, though the project later became associated with tragedy. He gave generously to Harvard, the Museum of Modern Art, and international cultural exchanges. In his later years, he continued writing and speaking on globalization, arguing that interconnected economies and institutions were essential for peace and prosperity in the modern world. David's personal life was quieter than his public role. He married Margaret Peggy McGrath in 1941. They had 6 children and remained married until her death in 1996. He was known for his gentlemanly demeanor, love of classical music, and lifelong habit of meticulous record-keeping echoing his grandfather's blue ledger. He lived simply relative to his wealth, often taking commercial flights even when private options were available. His longevity was remarkable. He attributed it to good genes, moderate habits, and an optimistic outlook. When David died in 2017, tributes poured in from around the world. Presidents, prime ministers, and business leaders praised his role in building bridges across nations. Environmentalists and progressives, however, noted the irony of a man whose bank had financed fossil fuel projects for decades while the family began confronting climate realities. Obituaries described him as the last of a certain kind of American statesman banker, a figure who moved comfortably between Wall Street and Washington, between corporate boardrooms and diplomatic salons. David's century of influence left a complex legacy. On one hand, he helped shape the architecture of post-war globalization, expanding American banking power, fostering international cooperation, and supporting institutions that promoted stability during the Cold War. Chase Manhattan, under his leadership, played a role in financing infrastructure, trade, and development projects across continents. He believed strongly in the liberal international order, open markets, alliances, and multilateral institutions, and worked to strengthen it. On the other hand, his activities fueled decades of criticism and conspiracy narratives. Some saw the combination of vast family wealth, banking power, and involvement in groups like the ChronoFun Trilateral Commission as evidence of undue influence over U.S. policy. Books and documentaries in the 1970s through the 2000s portrayed David as a central figure in an alleged global elite that prioritized corporate and financial interests over ordinary citizens. These claims often exaggerated his personal control and ignored the limits of any one individual's power in a complex democracy. Still, the perception of elite networks operating with limited public oversight persisted, reflecting deeper American anxieties about concentrated power in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. By the early 2020s, the divestment wave spread. The Rockefeller Foundation, the flagship institution founded in 1913 with a multi-billion-dollar endowment, pledged in late 2020 to divest from fossil fuels, becoming one of the largest U.S. foundations to join the movement. In 2023, it committed over $1 billion over 5 years to advance climate solutions, integrating climate action across its core areas of power, health, food, and finance. The strategy emphasized not just mitigation, but ensuring that the transition delivered opportunities for people historically left behind, a distinctly Rockefeller blend of pragmatism and equity. As of 2026, the results of these shifts are measurable. The REIBF has reduced its total fossil fuel exposure to approximately 0.2% of its endowment, down from 6.2% in 2014, with coal and tar sands near zero. Its endowment has grown despite the divestment, reaching over $13 billion while increasing grant-making on climate, democracy, and sustainable development. The family has redirected capital into renewable energy, regenerative agriculture, nature-based solutions, and decarbonization technologies. Some branches support litigation against fossil fuel companies, funding more than 30 climate-related lawsuits across the U.S. and backing initiatives like the Equation Campaign, launched in 2001 by descendants Rebecca Rockefeller Lambert and Peter Gilcase to fight new fossil fuel development. This pivot from oil to environment has not been uniform. The broader family includes hundreds of descendants with varied views, careers, and investment approaches. Some maintain traditional portfolios through Rockefeller Capital Management, the modern family office evolution. focusing on diversified finance, real estate, and long-term wealth preservation. Others work in venture capital, technology, or private equity, applying the family's historic emphasis on efficiency and scale to new sectors. Banking ties remain strong through institutional relationships, even as direct oil dependence has faded. Finance has become a central arena for the modern generations. Professional management through trusts and the family office continues to emphasize diversification, risk mitigation, and alignment with values where possible. Impact investing, seeking both financial returns and measurable social or environmental benefits, has gained traction, reflecting a broader evolution in American philanthropy. Younger Rockefellers increasingly view wealth as a tool for systemic solutions rather than simply charitable giving. Personal stories illustrate the diversity. Some fifth and sixth generation members pursue low-profile lives in business, academia, or the arts. Others step into advocacy, pushing criminal justice reform, an area advanced by the David Rockefeller Fund, supporting global health initiatives, or addressing plastic pollution and its ties to the petrochemical industry. Family gatherings at Pocantico Hills or other retreats still occur, blending nostalgia for Kikwit's history with discussions on contemporary challenges. Governance structures, boards with a mix of family members and independent experts help manage differences and maintain continuity. In 2006, the Rockefeller name carries layered meaning for Americans. To some, it still evokes the Gilded Age robber baron or elite's global influence. To others, it represents thoughtful, long-term philanthropy that has saved lives through medical research, expanded opportunity through education, and preserved natural beauty. The modern generations have added a new chapter, a family willing to critique and move beyond the very industry that created its fortune. This reckoning, imperfect and ongoing, resonates in a nation grappling with energy transitions, inequality, and climate urgency. The shift has brought both praise and pushback. Environmental advocates hail the divestment as principled leadership. Industry voices sometimes portray it as hypocritical or orchestrated activism, pointing to the family's historical profits from oil. Internal family dynamics reflect America's broader debates: how to honor the past while addressing its consequences, how to balance wealth preservation with moral imperatives, and how private capital can or should influence public outcomes. What remains consistent is the underlying philosophy of stewardship. From John D. Sayre's Blue Ledger to today's mission-aligned investing, the family has treated wealth as a responsibility rather than a birthright. Education of younger generations continues, teaching financial literacy, ethical decision-making, and the importance of contributing beyond one's own comfort. Many descendants build independent careers while participating in collective family philanthropy through vehicles like the RBF Rockefeller Foundation and smaller funds. As the seventh generation emerges, great-great-great-grandchildren entering adulthood in the 2020s and beyond, the dynasty faces new tests: artificial intelligence ethics, geopolitical shifts, biodiversity loss, and the evolving role of philanthropy in a polarized society. The trust system, professional family office, and cultural emphasis on unity provide a sturdy framework. Regular family meetings, shared values discussions, and governance rules help keep over 200 voices aligned enough to sustain influence without fragmentation. In many ways, the modern Rockefellers embody a uniquely American evolution. A fortune born of 19th century industrial grit has adapted to 21st century global challenges. The oil wells and blue barrels that defined the patriarch have given way to climate finance, regenerative systems, and international partnerships. Yet the core Dina persists: disciplined management, strategic ambition, and the belief that private resources, when thoughtfully deployed, can tackle problems too large for any single sector. By 2006, the dynasty no longer dominates headlines as it did during Nelson's vice presidency or David's banking era. Its power is quieter, more distributed, and often expressed through institutions rather than individuals. But its impact endures in preserved parks, advanced medical breakthroughs, cultural landmarks, and now in the urgent work of climate transition. The story of the modern generations is still being written, one investment, one grant, one moral choice at a time. It is a story of continuity amid change, of a family that has learned to critique its own origins while striving to leave a better world for the generations that follow. The oil age helped create the Rockefellers. The climate age is helping redefine them. David Rockefeller lived almost the entire 20th century and stepped into the 21st. Born on June 12, 1915, the youngest of the 6 children of John D. Rockefeller Jr. and Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, he died on March 20, 2017, at the age of 11. His life spanned from the tail end of the Gilded Age through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Cold War, globalization, and the dawn of the digital era. No single Rockefeller after the founder shaped the family's global footprint more profoundly than David. He became the face of Rockefeller internationalism, the architect of modern banking diplomacy, and a lightning rod for both admiration and suspicion about elite power in the late 20th century. Conspiracy theories, while often lacking evidence, persist because great wealth and influence naturally breed suspicion in a democratic society. The Rockefeller story offers a case study in how power operates, sometimes ruthlessly in its accumulation, sometimes constructively in its redistribution. Documented history shows a family that built an empire through aggressive capitalism common to its era, faced legitimate accountability for labor and competitive practices, and redirected much of its fortune toward public goods, eradicating diseases, advancing education and science, preserving land, and supporting culture. Yet no amount of giving fully erased the original sins of monopoly and distant corporate decisions that harmed workers and rivals. In 2006, as Americans continued debating inequality, corporate power, climate policy, and the role of private wealth, the Rockefeller name still evokes strong reactions. To some, it symbolizes the best of American enterprise and generosity. To others, it represents unchecked elite influence. The balanced view recognizes both: a dynasty that embodied the contradictions of its time, ambition and discipline, ruthlessness and redemption, innovation and inequality. The scandals and criticisms did not destroy the Rockefellers. In many ways, they forced evolution. Public pressure accelerated the shift from pure accumulation to systematic giving. Legal challenges refined their trust structures. Internal debates on modern issues like climate have kept parts of the family engaged with contemporary challenges rather than retreating into pure preservation. The conspiracy narratives, while often overstated, serve as a cultural reminder that no family, no matter how philanthropic, escapes accountability in the court of public opinion. Ultimately, the Rockefeller story is neither pure villainy nor unblemished heroism. It is a profoundly American tale of how one man's disciplined rise created unprecedented wealth, how that wealth's darker consequences demanded reckoning, and how subsequent generations attempted with varying success to turn controversy into constructive legacy. As the dynasty enters its 2nd century and beyond, the debates it inspires remain as relevant as ever in a nation still wrestling with the promises and perils of concentrated power. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, The Rockefeller Dynasty entered a new phase, one defined not by the towering figures of the past, but by a sprawling network of descendants navigating a world transformed by globalization, technology, climate crisis, and shifting American values. By 2026, the family had grown to more than 200 direct descendants across 7 generations, with the cousins, 4th generation, and their children and grandchildren, 5th, 6th, and 7th, taking the reins. The oil that once lit lamps and powered empires had become both a source of pride and historical achievement and a moral reckoning point. The modern Rockefellers would redefine the family legacy, moving capital from fossil fuels into finance, impact investing, and aggressive environmental advocacy, while preserving the disciplined stewardship that had kept the dynasty intact for over 140 years. The transition began in earnest after David Rockefeller's death in 2017 at age 101. As the last of the 5 famous brothers, David had embodied the global banker, chairman of Chase Manhattan, architect of international relationships, and a steady hand on the family's financial tiller. His passing marked the end of an era. The torch passed to a more decentralized group of cousins and their offspring, many of whom had been raised with the family creed of stewardship, but interpreted it through the lens of their own times: civil rights echoes, environmental awakening, globalization's opportunities and inequalities, and the urgent realities of climate change. Among the most visible in the 4th generation was J. Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller Ivor, son of John D. F. II, born in 1937, Jay forged a long political career as a Democrat in deeply Republican West Virginia, serving as governor and then U.S. Senator for decades. He focused on issues like coal country's economic transition, health care, and intelligence oversight, a pragmatic bridge between the family's historic wealth and the needs of working Americans. His wife, Sharon Percy Rockefeller, became a prominent public broadcasting executive. Their children continued public service and philanthropy in quieter ways. Other 4th-generation voices included Peggy Dulany, daughter of David, who founded the Synagogues Institute to foster global partnerships against poverty, and Neva Goodwin Rockefeller, an economist who emphasized alternative economic models that value human and environmental well-being over pure GDP growth. Eileen Rockefeller Growell channeled energy into emotional intelligence and social innovation. These cousins maintained the family's tradition of professional philanthropy, but infused it with a stronger focus on equity, sustainability, and systemic change. The real shift in tone and direction accelerated with the 5th generation. The great-great-grandchildren of the original John D. Many had come of age during the environmental movement, the end of the Cold War, and the rise of digital connectivity. They brought fresh urgency to the family's giving, particularly around climate. In September 2014, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, RBF, as a key family philanthropic vehicle with roots in 1940, made a landmark announcement. It would divest from fossil fuels. The decision carried powerful symbolism. Here was a foundation whose endowment traced back to Standard Oil money, publicly rejecting the industry that built the family fortune. RBF cited both moral and financial reasons. Fossil fuel investments risk becoming stranded assets in a carbon-constrained world. The move was not without internal family debate, but it gained momentum. In 2016, the smaller Rockefeller Family Fund went further, divesting aggressively and publicly, criticizing ExxonMobil, one of the largest successors to Standard Oil, for what it called morally reprehensible conduct regarding climate science. 5th-generation leader David Kaiser, grandson of David Rockefeller, who passed away in 2020, played a prominent role using the family name and network to support investigations into what companies knew about climate risks. Other voices, such as Valerie Rockefeller Wayne, daughter of Jay, spoke of a moral responsibility because the source of the family wealth was fossil fuels. To critics, this was predatory warfare. To defenders, it was smart business that brought efficiency to a wasteful, dangerous industry plagued by explosions and inconsistent quality. The most powerful indictment came not from politicians, but from a determined journalist. Ida Tarbell, whose own father had been ruined by Standard Oil's practices in the Pennsylvania oil fields, published a groundbreaking 19-part series in McClure's magazine between 1902 and 1904 titled The History of the Standard Oil Company. It meticulously documented rebates, secret deals, and ruthless competitive strategies using court records, internal documents, and interviews. Tarbell portrayed Rockefeller as a cold calculator who crushed honest businessmen. The series became a cornerstone of muckraking journalism and fueled public outrage. It helped build momentum for the Sherman Antitrust Act's enforcement, culminating in the 1911 Supreme Court decision that broke Standard Oil into 34 separate companies. Rockefeller rarely responded publicly, instructing associates to say not a word about that misguided woman. Privately, he was stung. Yet the breakup, ironically, enriched him further as shares in the successor companies, including what became Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron, soared in value. Prices for kerosene had already fallen dramatically under Standard Oil's efficiencies, from exorbitant levels to affordable household staples. But the public narrative stuck Rockefeller as the archetypal robber baron. A far bloodier scandal erupted in 1914 with the Ludlow Massacre. Workers at the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, in which the Rockefellers held a major stake, struck for better wages, safer conditions, and union recognition. Tensions boiled over on April 20 when state militia and company guards clashed with striking miners and their families in a tent colony. Machine gun fire and a subsequent fire killed around 25 people, including women and children. The nation recoiled in horror. Headlines branded it Rockefeller's Massacre. Protesters marched on the family's New York home. Jr., who had inherited oversight of the investment, initially defended the company's position, but later traveled to Colorado, met with miners, danced at company events to show goodwill, and testified before Congress. He introduced the Colorado Industrial Plan, an early employee representation scheme. Critics called it a sham company union. Others saw it as a sincere, if imperfect, step toward labor reform. The episode forced the family to confront the human cost of distant investments and accelerated Junior's pivot toward progressive labor relations and broader social responsibility. Personal and family scandals added layers of public fascination. Senior's father, Big Bill Rockefeller, was a traveling con man who sold dubious cancer cures and lived as a bigamist fax that fueled early attacks on the family's moral foundation. Edith Rockefeller McCormick's very public divorce in the 1920s made tabloid headlines. Winthrop Rockefeller's colorful personal life, including a high-profile divorce and battles with alcohol, provided ammunition for those who viewed the family as privileged and flawed. Yet compared to other Gilded Age clans, the Rockefellers maintained remarkable family discipline and avoided the spectacular financial collapses or endless feuds that doomed many peers. As the 20th century progressed, and the family's influence globalized, new criticisms emerged. Some accused the Rockefeller Foundation of advancing eugenics-inspired population control programs in the mid-20th century, tying early public health and agricultural initiatives to controversial social engineering ideas popular in certain intellectual circles at the time. Others questioned the family's role in shaping American medicine through funding medical schools and research, suggesting it tilted toward pharmaceutical approaches over holistic ones, a claim often exaggerated in later alternative health narratives. The family's deep involvement in institutions like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, co-founded by David Rockefeller, drew charges of undue elite influence on U.S. foreign policy. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, conspiracy theories proliferated in books, documentaries, and online spaces. Some portrayed the Rockefellers as puppet masters behind everything from the Federal Reserve's creation to modern globalization, climate policies, and even alleged suppression of alternative energy or medical breakthroughs. Claims range from the plausible concerns about concentrated private power to the outlandish secret societies, world government plots, or engineering pandemics. These narratives often blended kernels of truth, the family's real historical influence on banking, philanthropy, and international affairs with speculation that ignored the decentralized nature of later generations and the professional governance of their trusts and foundations. A more grounded modern controversy erupted over climate change and fossil fuels. As successors to Standard Oil, companies like ExxonMobil became targets of environmental scrutiny. Starting in the 2000s and intensifying in the 2010s, some Rockefeller descendants, through the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and Rockefeller Family Fund, began pressing ExxonMobil on climate disclosure and risk. Investigative journalism, partly supported by family-linked funding, alleged that Exxon had known about climate risks for decades while publicly emphasizing uncertainty. In 2016, the Rockefeller Family Fund announced divestment from ExxonMobil, citing what it called the company's morally reprehensible conduct. Exxon pushed back forcefully, accusing the family and aligned groups of orchestrating a conspiracy to damage the company through investigations and legal pressure. Court filings and public statements framed it as a coordinated campaign rather than legitimate shareholder or civic engagement. The irony was rich. Descendants of the man who built the modern oil industry now criticizing one of its largest heirs. Family members involved emphasized using wealth generated by fossil fuels to address the problems those fuels created, a form of generational accountability. Others in the broader family tree maintained more traditional investment approaches. The episode highlighted real divisions within the extended clan, but also the family's evolved stance on environmental stewardship, consistent with earlier conservation efforts led by Lawrence Rockefeller. As of 2026, debates over divestment, climate litigation, and corporate responsibility continue, reflecting broader American tensions over energy, economy, and environment. Throughout these scandals and criticisms, the Rockefellers responded with a mix of silence, adaptation, and strategic philanthropy. Sr. endured the antitrust battle and Tarbell's pen without public retaliation. Jr. confronted Ludlow directly and used the crisis to reform labor practices. Later generations engaged more openly with critics on issues like climate, while maintaining the family's tradition of private governance and long-term thinking. Professional trustees, independent boards at the major foundations, and diversified investments have prevented any single scandal from threatening the dynasty's core, but structures alone were not enough. The Rockefellers understood that wealth preservation required cultural reinforcement. They developed what amounted to a family constitution, informal at first, later more formalized, outlining values, expectations, and governance. Regular family meetings brought generations together to discuss not just money, but purpose. Heirs were taught from a young age that they were stewards, not owners. Chores, modest allowances, and education in finance and ethics mirrored the lessons Sr. had given his own children. The message was consistent. The fortune exists to serve higher goals. scientific progress, education, conservation, peace, and human well-being, not personal extravagance. Governance evolved with each generation. The five brothers of the third generation collaborated through the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, whose board included both family members and outside experts. By the fourth generation, the cousin structures became more democratic yet professionalized. Today, as of 2026, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund is governed by a board of around 1823 trustees, with roughly half being Rockefeller family members, including seventh-generation voices, and the rest bringing expertise in finance, law, arts, international relations, and social issues. The Rockefeller Foundation maintains its own independent board and leadership focused on global challenges like climate, health, and equity. Rockefeller Capital Management, the modern evolution of the family office, provides wealth management services while preserving the legacy of disciplined long-term investing. This system has proven remarkably resilient. The original fortune, once concentrated in Standard Oil stock, survived the 1911 antitrust breakup, which ironically increased its value, the Great Depression, world wars, inflation, market crashes, and massive societal changes. By keeping assets in trust, the family avoided the rapid dilution that dooms most dynasties. Estimates of the collective Rockefeller wealth in recent years place it in the range of $811 billion, spread among roughly 200 descendants substantial, though far less concentrated than Senior's peak. The point was never to create trillionaires. It was to sustain influence, values, and philanthropic impact across time. Controversies have tested the system. Some family members in later generations pushed for divestment from fossil fuels, creating tension with the oil-derived roots of the fortune. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund and certain family voices became vocal on climate issues, even supporting efforts critical of ExxonMobil, a Standard Oil successor. These internal debates highlighted the system's flexibility, allowing evolution while protecting core assets. Professional trustees and governance rules prevented any single activist or spendthrift from derailing the whole. In practice, the trusts work through careful distribution policies. Beneficiaries receive support for education, housing, and reasonable living, but large principal distributions are rare and require approval. This encourages productive lives rather than idle dependence. Many descendants have pursued careers in business, politics, science, arts, and philanthropy on their own merits, from Senator J. Rockefeller, a great-grandson who served West Virginia, to environmentalists, investors, and nonprofit leaders. The trust system provides a safety net without removing the incentive to contribute. As we look at the dynasty in 2026, the trust architecture remains the quiet backbone. Irrevocable dynasty trusts, generation skipping strategies, professional management through institutions with long family ties, and a culture of stewardship continue to function. Family councils and governance committees ensure alignment across hundreds of cousins and their children. The Rockefeller name still opens doors in global finance, policy, and philanthropy precisely because the system has preserved both capital and credibility. Critics sometimes portray the trusts as tools of elite power, shielding vast resources from taxation and democratic accountability. Supporters see them as a model of responsible capitalism, demonstrating how private wealth, properly structured, can fund innovation and public goods that governments alone cannot sustain. The Rockefeller approach influenced countless other American families and wealth advisors. Today's ultra-wealthy, from tech billionaires to old money lineages, study the Rockefeller method when designing their own estate plans. Yet the true measure of endurance is not dollars alone. It is the survival of the founding ethos. Senior's Baptist discipline, Junior's bridge to philanthropy, the brothers' diverse contributions, and the cousins' global outlook all flow through the same legal and cultural channels. The trusts do not merely hold money, they hold a philosophy. Wealth is a trust for the benefit of humanity. In an era of rapid technological change, economic uncertainty, and debates over inequality, the Rockefeller Trust System stands as a case study in American ingenuity. It shows how foresight, legal innovation, professional management, and moral education can turn a 19th century oil fortune into a living institution that spans 7 generations and continues shaping the world in 2026. The dynasty did not endure by accident. It endured by design, a masterful blend of ironclad structures and human values that transform potential vulnerability into lasting strength. As new generations step forward, the trusts remain the silent guardians, ensuring that the Rockefeller story is far from over. No American dynasty has escaped scrutiny, but few have been as relentlessly examined and mythologized as the Rockefellers. From the Gilded Age cartoons depicting John D. Rockefeller Sr. as a monstrous octopus strangling the nation to modern online forums accusing the family of engineering global events, the name has long served as a lightning rod for both legitimate criticism and wild speculation. The truth, as always in history, lies somewhere between the ruthless industrialist of progressive era exposés and the benevolent philanthropist of later public relations campaigns. Understanding the scandals requires separating documented actions from exaggeration, while recognizing how the family's immense power inevitably invited both fair accountability and enduring conspiracy narratives. The earliest and most damaging scandal centered on Standard Oil's rise. In the 1870s, Rockefeller's company employed aggressive tactics common in the chaotic, unregulated oil industry of the time. Secret railroad rebates gave Standard Oil lower shipping rates than competitors, allowing it to undercut prices and dominate markets. The so-called Cleveland Massacre of 1872 saw Rockefeller acquire or force out dozens of rival refineries in rapid succession. In the decades that followed, later generations built on this foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation continued supporting artists and storytellers through residencies like those at the Bellagio Center, emphasizing art's power to challenge assumptions, preserve heritage, and inspire dialogue on global issues. Family members served on boards of major institutions, donated significant collections, and advocated for public access to the arts. Even as the family diversified its wealth into finance, real estate, and other sectors, the commitment to culture remained a constant thread, a way to give back beauty and meaning to a society that had enabled their success. Critics sometimes pointed out the irony of fortune built on industrial standardization and monopoly now funded the celebration of individual creativity and modernism. Yet the Rockefellers saw no contradiction. They believed that just as efficient industry had lit homes and powered progress, cultural institutions could enlighten minds and enrich spirits. Art was not a luxury, it was essential to a well-rounded civilization. As the 21st century unfolded and the documentary lens turned toward 20th and 6th, Rockefeller Center still pulsed with life. The Christmas tree lighting remained a national tradition, the plaza a gathering spot for New Yorkers and tourists alike. MoMA continued to evolve, expanding its galleries, embracing new media, and drawing millions of visitors each year to experience the art that Abbey had once fought to legitimize. The broader cultural legacy, from preserved historic sites to supported artists worldwide, demonstrated how one family's wealth, guided by vision and values, could shape the aesthetic and intellectual landscape of a nation. These efforts were never about vanity or mere prestige. They reflected the Rockefeller ethos of stewardship, using resources to create enduring public goods. In an age of rapid change, economic upheaval, and cultural debates, Rockefeller Center and MoMA stood as testaments to the idea that private initiative, when exercised with foresight and generosity, could leave a positive mark on the shared American experience. The cultural chapter of the dynasty showed a family maturing, moving from the raw power of oil to the softer yet equally transformative power of ideas, beauty, and inspiration. It was another bridge built by Junior and Abby, one that their children and grandchildren would continue to strengthen and expand. By the early 1930s, as John D. Rockefeller Sr. entered his final decade and Junior assumed fuller control of the family's affairs, a quiet but profound shift occurred behind the scenes in the Rockefeller empire. The headlines still focused on oil, politics, and philanthropy, but the real machinery ensuring the dynasty's survival was being forged in lawyers' offices, bank vaults, and family meetings. It was a system of legal and financial structures designed not just to protect wealth, but to make it last generation after generation, while embedding values of stewardship, responsibility, and public purpose. This was the Rockefeller Trust System, one of the most sophisticated and enduring examples of multi-generational wealth preservation in American history. The foundation was laid early. John D. Sr. had always approached money with the precision of a bookkeeper. From his childhood Blue Ledger to the vast Standard Oil empire, he hated waste and believed in order. As his fortune ballooned, he understood a hard truth that has destroyed many wealthy families. Great riches often vanish by the third generation. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, the old saying went. The Vanderbilts, once far richer in some respects, saw their railroad and shipping empire dissipate through lavish spending, poor investments, and family infighting. Sr. was determined his legacy would be different. The first building blocks were the irrevocable trusts established in the early 20th century. These legal vehicles transferred assets out of personal ownership and into protected structures. Once placed in an irrevocable trust, the assets were shielded from many risks, creditors, lawsuits, divorces, and especially the heavy hand of estate taxes that could claim up to 70% or more of a fortune at death in those eras. By placing large portions of stock, real estate, and cash into trust for his children and later grandchildren, Sr. ensured that wealth would not be eroded by one generation's mistakes or one government's tax policies. Jr. took this strategy further. In 1934, he created a series of trusts for his 6 children. Then, in 1952, the family formalized what became known as the Dynasty Trust, a multi-generational vehicle specifically engineered to last across decades, even centuries. These trusts leveraged generation-skipping provisions allowed under tax law at the time, minimizing or avoiding the generation-skipping transfer tax that would otherwise hit hard when wealth jumped over a generation. Professional trustees, often major institutions like Chase Bank, which had deep ties to the family through David Rockefeller's banking career, were appointed to manage the assets with expertise and continuity. Individual family members were beneficiaries, not owners, receiving income or distributions according to strict guidelines rather than gaining full control that could lead to reckless spending. The genius of the system lay in its layers. At the core were the family trusts holding the bulk of the wealth. These were supported by life insurance policies, another key tool that provided tax-free liquidity upon death to replenish the trusts or pay any remaining taxes without forcing the sale of productive asset. The family also created charitable trusts and foundations, most notably the Rockefeller Foundation, 1913, and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, 1940, which served dual purposes, advancing philanthropic goals and providing additional tax advantages while channeling surplus wealth into public good. A critical element was the family office, one of the earliest and most influential in America. What began informally as Rockefeller Family and Associates evolved into a professional operation handling investments, taxes, legal matters, philanthropy coordination, and even the education of heirs. This mission control center ensured centralized oversight without concentrating too much power in any single person. Diversification became doctrine, moving beyond oil into banking, real estate, including Rockefeller Center, venture investments, Lawrence's early stakes in aviation and tech, and later global markets. The family learned to never sell, only borrow against assets when liquidity was needed, keeping the principal intact and growing. But the heart of Rockefeller Center was not just the towers. It was the sunken plaza, designed as a gathering place. In 1933, the first Christmas tree was erected there, a modest 20-foot balsam fir decorated simply. By the following year, it had become an annual tradition that would grow into a global symbol of holiday cheer, drawing millions to Midtown every December. The plaza itself hosted ice skating in winter and outdoor dining in summer, turning a commercial development into a living public space. Junior poured his personal attention into every detail. He insisted on quality materials, commissioned sculptures and murals, and envisioned the complex as a place where commerce met culture. One of the most famous and controversial artistic additions was the mural in the Riege building lobby by Mexican artist Diego Rivera. Titled Man at the Crossroads, it featured a central figure controlling machinery, but also included a portrait of Vladimir Lenin. When Junior and his advisors discovered the political imagery, they demanded changes. Rivera refused. The mural was destroyed and later replaced by a more neutral work by Josep Maria Sert. The episode highlighted the tensions between artistic freedom and the sensibilities of powerful patrons, yet it did not derail the project's momentum. By 1939, the core of Rockefeller Center was complete. It stood as a triumph of vision over adversity, a gleaming Art Deco masterpiece that transformed a rundown area into a vibrant commercial and tourist hub. Over the decades, it became home to Radio City Music Hall, with its legendary Rockets precision dance troupe, the Rainbow Room, a glamorous nightclub perched high above the city, and countless businesses that powered New York's economy. In 1985, it was designated a New York City landmark, and in 1987, a National Historic Landmark. Though the family eventually sold majority control to Tishman Speyer in 2000 for $185 billion. The Rockefeller name remained synonymous with the complex, and the family retained influence through ongoing philanthropy and stewardship. Rockefeller Center was more than steel and stone. It was a statement that even in the darkest economic times, bold private initiative could create jobs, beauty, and enduring value for the public. It embodied Junior's belief in thoughtful development, efficient, beautiful, and beneficial to society at large. For generations of Americans walking through Rockefeller Plaza, gazing up at the towering buildings or watching the tree lighting on television, became a shared cultural experience, a piece of the American dream built by one family's fortune and foresight. While Junior shaped the physical landscape of New York through Rockefeller Center, his wife, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, was quietly revolutionizing the cultural soul of the city and the nation. Abby, with her outgoing personality, artistic eye, and independent spirit, had long chafed against the more traditional tastes of her husband. Junior preferred classical and medieval art. Abby was drawn to the bold, the modern, the provocative. In the 1920s, she began collecting works by living artists, pieces by Picasso, Matisse, Surratt, and others that many Americans at the time dismissed as strange or even dangerous. Her vision crystallized in 1920. Together with two friends, Lily P. Bliss and Mary Quinn Sullivan, Abby founded the Museum of Modern Art MoMA in a rented space at 700 Fifth Avenue. The timing could hardly have been worse. The museum opened just days before the stock market crash. Yet the three women pressed forward with courage and conviction. They believed America needed a dedicated institution to champion modern art, not as dusty relics of the past, but as vital expressions of contemporary life. Abby served as the first treasurer and was deeply involved in fundraising, exhibitions, and daily operations, often acting as a nurturing force for the young museum staff, including its visionary first director. Alfred H. Barr, Jumyer Abbey's personal collection, formed an important foundation for MoMA. She donated hundreds of works, including prints, drawings, and paintings. Her influence extended to the museum's famous sculpture garden, later named in her honor. The Abby Aldrich Rockefeller Sculpture Garden became a tranquil oasis in Midtown, showcasing modern sculptures by artists like Henry Moore, Aristide Maillol, and others. Family members continued the involvement. Nelson Rockefeller served as MoMA's president starting in 1939 and was a passionate collector and advocate. David Rockefeller joined the board in 1948 and helped expand the museum's architecture and collections, including commissioning Philip Johnson to redesign the sculpture garden. MoMA quickly became the premier institution for modern and contemporary art in the United States, introducing Americans to European avant-garde movements while nurturing homegrown talent. Exhibitions like American Folk Art, The Art of the Common Man, which Abby also championed through her separate collection of folk art, later donated to Colonial Williamsburg, bridged high art with everyday creativity. Abby's efforts helped shift New York from a cultural backwater to the capital of the modern art world, especially after World War I, when many European artists and intellectuals fled to the city. The cultural legacy of the Rockefellers extended far beyond these two flagship projects. Jr. restored Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, preserving early American history and architecture on a grand scale. He funded the restoration of historic sites in France after World War I, including contributions to Chartres Cathedral in Versailles. The family supported Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, helping establish New York as a global performing arts capital. They gave to museums, theaters, and educational institutions across the country, always with an eye toward accessibility and long-term impact. Lawrence Rockefeller's work in conservation complemented the cultural efforts. His developments in sensitive resort design showed that beauty and commerce could align with environmental respect. The brothers collectively supported the arts through the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and individual foundations, ensuring that music, theater, dance, and visual arts received sustained private backing, even when government funding fluctuated. By the mid-20th century, the Rockefeller name had become associated not only with oil and philanthropy and science and health, but with a distinctly American approach to culture, democratic yet sophisticated, innovative yet rooted in stewardship. The family's collections at Kikwit, the Grand Estate in the Pocantico Hills, reflected this breadth, blending European masters, Asian art, modern sculptures by Calder and Picasso, and American folk pieces. Nelson added contemporary works by Warhol and others, turning the estate into a living museum of the family's eclectic tastes. The five sons of John D. Rockefeller Jr. and Abby Aldrich Rockefeller entered adulthood as the world hurtled toward the midpoint of the 20th century. Born between 1906 and 1915, John D. Rockefeller Dree, Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, Lawrence Spelman Rockefeller, Winthrop Rockefeller, and David Rockefeller were raised at the intersection of immense privilege. They were not just heirs to one of the greatest fortunes in history, they were the third generation tasked with proving that the Rockefeller name stood for something more than oil, monopoly, and controversy. They were expected to serve America and the world. They called themselves the Brothers. From an early age, they shared summers at the family's sprawling Pocantico Hills estate in New York, winter trips to the Adirondacks, and childhood visits to the national parks their father helped preserve. Junior instilled in them the same Baptist values of stewardship, discipline, and public responsibility that his own father had passed down. Yet each brother was strikingly different in personality, ambition, and path. Together, they would stretch the Rockefeller legacy across politics, business, conservation, international relations, and culture like never before. The eldest, John D. Rockefeller Dre, often called George Hurd, born in 1906, was the quiet, dutiful one. Tall, reserved, and introspective like his father, he graduated from Princeton and seemed destined for a life of thoughtful philanthropy. After a world tour in the 1920s that sparked a lifelong fascination with Asia, he became the family's leading voice on international understanding. He founded the Asia Society in 1956 to promote cultural exchange between the United States and Asian nations at a time when the Cold War made such bridges vital. He chaired the Rockefeller Foundation for 2 decades and poured energy into population issues through the Population Council, believing that stabilizing global population growth was essential for human progress. He supported agricultural development in Asia and helped shape early family planning efforts. Tragically, Jader III died in a car accident in 1978 at age 72, cutting short a life defined by quiet, behind-the-scenes impact rather than headlines. The most flamboyant and politically ambitious of the brothers was Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, born in 1908. Charismatic, energetic, and larger than life, Nelson inherited his mother Abby's love of art and his grandfather's drive. He studied at Dartmouth, worked briefly in the family's oil interests in Venezuela, where he learned Spanish and developed a passion for Latin America, and entered public service during World War I as coordinator of inter-American affairs under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a Democrat despite the family's traditional Republican leanings. He later served in the Truman and Eisenhower administrations in roles focused on Latin America and government reorganization. In 1958, Nelson launched his political career in earnest, winning election as governor of New York. He would serve an unprecedented 4 terms, becoming one of the most powerful and progressive Republican governors in American history. Under his watch, New York built the Empire State Plaza in Albany, often called the Rockefeller Mall, expanded higher education, advanced civil rights and environmental protections, and poured resources into the arts. He championed ambitious infrastructure and social programs, earning a reputation as a liberal Republican or Rockefeller Republican at a time when the party was shifting rightward. Nelson ran unsuccessfully for the Republican presidential nomination in 1960, 1964, and 1968. His liberal views on civil rights, abortion, and government activism clashed with the rising conservative wing led by Barry Goldwater and later Ronald Reagan. Yet his persistence paid off in 1970 after Richard Nixon's resignation amid Watergate. President Gerald Ford nominated Nelson as vice president under the 25th Amendment. After contentious confirmation hearings focused on his vast wealth and past business dealings, he was sworn in on December 19, 1974. As vice president, he chaired the Domestic Council and the commission investigating CIA activities in the United States. He served until January 1977, when Ford chose not to keep him on the ticket for the 1976 election. Nelson died suddenly in 1979 at age 70. His life embodied the high-wire act of mixing immense family wealth with raw political ambition in the glare of American democracy. Lawrence Spelman Rockefeller, born in 1910, took a different route. Handsome, athletic, and deeply influenced by his father's love of nature, Lawrence became the family's conservationist and venture capitalist. He graduated from Princeton and Harvard Law, served in the Navy during World War I working on aircraft development, and then channeled his energies into preserving America's natural beauty. He was instrumental in expanding Grand Teton National Park, donating family land, and helping develop visitor facilities like Jackson Lake Lodge, Acadia, and other parks. He founded Rock Resorts, a company that developed environmentally sensitive luxury hotels in places like the Virgin Islands and Hawaii, proving that tourism and conservation could coexist. Lawrence was also a pioneer in venture capital, investing early in companies like Eastern Airlines and Intel like innovators. He chaired the White House Conference on Natural Beauty in 1965 under President Lyndon Johnson and received the Congressional Gold Medal for his environmental work. Quietly influential and long-lived. He died in 2004 at age 94. Lawrence showed that the Rockefeller fortune could fund both profit and preservation, a balance that would influence later generations' thinking on sustainability. The fourth brother, Winthrop Rockefeller, born in 1912, was the family's rebel and adventurer. Big, gregarious, and restless, he struggled with the weight of the name more than the others. After studying at Yale and working in the Texas oil fields to learn the business from the ground up, he served heroically in the Pacific during World War I, where he was wounded. Post-war, he moved to Arkansas's deliberately far from the East Coast establishment and built a cattle ranch. In 1953, he married Barbara Bobo Sears in a high-profile wedding, but the marriage ended in a messy, very public divorce. Winthrop entered politics as a Republican in Democratic-dominated Arkansas. In 1966, he won election as governor, the first Republican to hold the office since Reconstruction. He served 2 terms, focusing on education reform, economic development, and racial moderation during the turbulent civil rights era. He modernized state government and attracted industry, but his personal life, including a second marriage and battles with alcoholism, made headlines. Winthrop died in 1973 at age 60 from cancer, leaving a legacy as a bridge builder who brought the Rockefeller name to the American South and proved that even the most privileged could choose unconventional paths. The public outcry was ferocious. Congress held hearings. Socialist newspapers called for the Rockefellers' heads. Junior, then 40 years old, faced the crisis head-on. Instead of hiding behind lawyers, he traveled to Colorado. He met with miners and their families. He really listened for hours. He attended union meetings. He even danced with the miners' wives at a company event to show goodwill. Back in New York, he testified before the U.S. Commission on Industrial Relations. In a calm, earnest voice, he admitted mistakes had been made. He pledged reforms, better housing, schools, and medical care for workers. He introduced the Colorado Industrial Plan, an early experiment in employee representation that gave workers a voice without full union recognition. Critics called it a company union. Supporters saw it as a sincere first step. The Ludlow crisis nearly broke Junior emotionally. He lost weight. He struggled with insomnia, yet it forged him. He emerged more determined than ever to use the family's wealth for social good. I believe the only way to solve labor problems is through understanding and cooperation, he later reflected. The experience pushed him deeper into progressive causes, public health, education, and racial justice, while still honoring his father's belief in efficiency and personal responsibility. In 1915, tragedy struck the family again. Seti Rockefeller passed away after years of declining health. Junior was devastated. His mother had been his moral compass. Her funeral was private, but the loss deepened his sense of duty. He now stood as the primary bridge between his father's generation and whatever came next. That same year, Junior married Abigail "Abby" Aldrich, the spirited, cultured daughter of Senator Nelson Aldrich of Rhode Island. Abby was everything Junior was not: outgoing, artistic, socially confident. She loved beauty, collected art with passion, and had a genuine interest in people from all walks of life. Their marriage was a true partnership. Abby helped soften Junior's reserve and open doors into the world of culture and high society. Together they would have 6 children: Abby, John D. Ray, Nelson, Lawrence, Winthrop, and David, the famous Rockefeller brothers who would shape the 20th century. With Abby by his side, Junior accelerated the family's philanthropic vision. In 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation was formally chartered with an initial endowment of $100 million, an almost unimaginable sum at the time. Its mission was bold: to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world. Under Junior's careful oversight, it tackled hookworm in the American South, malaria in the tropics, and built schools across China and Europe. It helped establish the League of Nations Health Organization, a precursor to the World Health Organization. Junior also turned his attention to conservation and culture. He donated vast tracts of land for national parks, including parts of Acadia, Great Smoky Mountains, and Grand Teton. He believed Americans needed places of natural beauty to refresh their spirits. In New York City, he rescued the land that became Rockefeller Center, a visionary urban project that created jobs during the Great Depression and gave the city one of its most iconic landmarks. Perhaps his most personal cultural contribution was the Museum of Modern Art. Abby was a driving force behind MoMA, and Junior provided crucial financial and moral support. He understood that art was not a luxury, but a vital part of human progress. The family's collection grew to include works by Picasso, Matisse, and Van Gogh, pieces that would one day be displayed for millions. Through the 1920s and 1930s, as his father lived into extreme old age, Junior quietly managed the vast fortune. He diversified investments, moving away from pure oil dependence. He navigated the stock market crash of 1929 with characteristic caution and emerged relatively unscathed. While many old fortunes vanished, the Rockefeller wealth endured because of disciplined stewardship. Sr. passed away on May 23, 1937, at the age of 97. The man who had once been the most vilified figure in America was mourned as a pioneer of both industry and giving. Junior, now 63, became the undisputed head of the dynasty. He had spent 4 decades preparing for this moment, turning a controversial industrial fortune into one of the most respected philanthropic legacies in the world. Yet Junior never sought the spotlight. He remained modest, often traveling by commercial train rather than private jet. Long before such jets existed, he wore simple suits and avoided scandal. When critics still attacked the family name, he responded with quiet action rather than defensiveness. By the time World War ended, the Rockefeller Foundation had become a global institution. It funded groundbreaking work in population studies, agricultural science, helping launch the Green Revolution, and international relations. Junior's vision had helped professionalize American philanthropy, moving it from personal charity to strategic, evidence-based impact. In his later years, Junior focused on passing the torch to his own children. He built them a strong moral framework, much as his father had done for him. Each of the 6 siblings received careful guidance, but was encouraged to find their own path. He told them repeatedly, "The money is yours only in trust. You are stewards, not owners." When John D. Rockefeller Jr. died on May 11, 1960, at age 86, he left behind a transformed family legacy. The ruthless oil baron's son had become the architect of modern American philanthropy. He had bridged the Gilded Age and the American century. He had taken a fortune stained by monopoly and labor conflict and redirected it toward medicine, education, culture, and conservation. The bridge had held. The dynasty had not only survived, it had evolved. Now it was the turn of the third generation, the Rockefeller brothers, to carry the name into the turbulent decades of the Cold War, civil rights, environmental awakening, and beyond. Junior's quiet strength had proven that redemption was possible. A family once synonymous with greed had become synonymous with giving on a scale that changed the world. SETI played a crucial role here. Her abolitionist roots influenced the family's support for education, especially for African Americans and women. The Rockefellers helped fund Spelman College, named after SETI's family, a historically black women's college in Atlanta. They gave generously to Baptist causes, missionary work, and early efforts in public health. By the 1890s, as John gradually stepped back from daily operations at Standard Oil, the family's focus shifted more openly toward giving. The move to a grander but still relatively understated estate called Keequeat in the Pocantico Hills of Westchester County, New York, symbolized this new chapter. Perched on a hill with sweeping views of the Hudson River, Keequeat became the family's spiritual and physical anchor for generations. John designed the grounds with the same attention to efficiency and beauty he brought to refineries. Even in retirement, John remained disciplined. He rose early, exercised, managed his investments personally, and played golf, a game he loved passionately, often keeping score with the same precision he once applied to oil barrels. He lived to be nearly 98, outlasting many critics, and attributed his longevity to simple living, faith, and avoiding worry. The private man behind the public myth was complex. To his family, he was loving and principled. To competitors, he was merciless. To the American public, he became a symbol, first of ruthless capitalism, later of transformative generosity. He donated more than $500 million in his lifetime, an astonishing sum equivalent to tens of billions today, funding the University of Chicago, the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now Rockefeller University, and countless churches, schools, and hospitals. Yet the greatest legacy of these years was not buildings or endowments. It was the values instilled in the next generation: stewardship over ownership, responsibility over entitlement, faith over fame. John D. Rockefeller, Sr., had turned the chaos of his own childhood, marked by an absent con-man father, into a disciplined, God-centered household that would shape American philanthropy for a century. As the 20th century dawned, the torch was quietly passing. Junior, now a young man fresh out of Brown University, stood at the threshold. He had watched his father build an empire and begin to redeem it through giving. The boy who once earned pennies for chores would soon manage hundreds of millions and face crises that would test the family's moral armor like never before. The patriarch had laid the foundation. Now the dynasty would be tested in the fires of public scandal, labor strife, and a rapidly changing America. The year was 1897. A serious, slender young man of 23 stepped off the train at Grand Central Depot in New York City. John D. Rockefeller, Jr. had just graduated from Brown University, where he had studied diligently but avoided the spotlight. He carried with him a heavy sense of duty. His father had built the greatest industrial empire America had ever seen. Now it was Junior's turn to help manage it and eventually to redeem it. From the moment he was born in 1874, Junior had lived in the long shadow of the Rockefeller name. He was the only son, the heir apparent. While his sisters could chart somewhat independent paths, Junior knew the family fortune, reputation, and moral legacy rested largely on his shoulders. His father had never pressured him with harsh words, but the expectation was always there, quiet and constant, like the ticking of a well-oiled clock. Junior's early years had been sheltered. Private tutors, strict Baptist upbringing, summers at the family's Forest Hill estate in Cleveland. He was shy, introspective, and deeply sensitive, the opposite of his father's steely business demeanor. At Brown, he had roomed with ordinary students, joined the Glee Club, and developed a quiet passion for social issues. He graduated without fanfare, determined to prove himself worthy. His first real test came quickly. In 1897, Sr. handed him responsibility for the family's growing philanthropic efforts. At the time, the Rockefellers were already giving away millions annually, but it was largely ad hoc. Jr. was tasked with bringing order and vision to the giving. It was the perfect role for a young man who preferred ledgers and long-term planning over the cutthroat world of oil. He threw himself into the work with characteristic thoroughness. He studied every request, visited institutions, and asked hard questions. Will this create lasting change? Does it promote self-reliance? Is it efficient? These were the same principles his father had applied to refining oil, now applied to healing society. One of his earliest major initiatives was the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, founded in 1901. Jr. believed science could conquer disease the way industry had conquered darkness. He poured millions into it, attracting world-class researchers. Within years, the Institute, later Rockefeller University, made breakthroughs in combating meningitis, pneumonia, and yellow fever. It became a model for modern biomedical research in America. But Jr.'s bridge-building role was not only about money, it was about repairing the family's damaged public image. The name Rockefeller still evoked the ruthless Standard Oil Trust in the minds of many Americans. The 1911 Supreme Court breakup had dismantled the monopoly legally, but the stigma remained. Jr. understood that philanthropy alone was not enough. The family needed to demonstrate genuine concern for ordinary people. The greatest test of his character came in 1914 in the coal fields of southern Colorado. The Ludlow Massacre remains one of the darkest chapters in American labor history. Workers at the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, a Rockefeller-controlled operation, had gone on strike for better wages, safer conditions, and the right to unionize. Tensions escalated. On April 20, 1914, a clash between striking miners and state militia turned deadly. Women and children died in a fire that swept through a tent colony. The nation was horrified. Headlines screamed, "Rockefeller's Massacre." Jr. was personally blamed, even though he was not directly involved in day-to-day operations. Ironically, the breakup made Rockefeller richer. He owned shares in all successors. As stock prices soared, his wealth peaked. He retired from day-to-day management in 1897 at age 58, but remained the largest shareholder. The retirement allowed him to focus on two things: golf — he loved the game — and giving away money systematically, strategically, and on a scale never seen before. The Octopus had been chopped into pieces, but its DNA lived on in modern oil giants and in the Rockefeller name. The gas lamps of Cleveland flickered softly through the windows of the modest yet comfortable home on Euclid Avenue in the 1870s. Inside, the Rockefeller household moved with quiet precision. John D. Rockefeller, already a titan in the rough and tumble world of oil, stepped through the door each evening and transformed. The ruthless negotiator who could outmaneuver railroads and bankrupt competitors became Papa, a gentle, playful father who got down on the floor with his children and made them laugh until their sides hurt. His wife, Laura Celestia Seti Spellman Rockefeller, was his perfect counterbalance. Born into a family of abolitionists and educators, Seti brought culture, compassion, and unshakable moral clarity to their union. They had married on September 8, 1864, in Cleveland, two serious, faith-driven young people who saw marriage not as romance alone, but as a sacred partnership for building something greater than themselves. Together they raised 5 children who survived infancy: Elizabeth Bessie, born 1866, Alice, who died tragically at 13 months, Alta, born 1871, Edith, born 1871, Edith, born 1872, and the long-awaited only son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., born January 29, 1874. The family called him Junior almost from the cradle. Life in the Rockefeller home was deliberately simple, almost austere by the standards of Gilded Age millionaires. No lavish balls, no fleets of servants flaunting wealth. John insisted on it. "Who do you think we are, the Vanderbilts?" he would gently chide when the children's spending requests grew too bold. The house had fine furniture, but no ostentation. Meals were hearty but plain. Luxury, in John's view, bred weakness. Every morning began the same way. At 7:30 sharp, the family gathered for prayers. John read from the Bible in his calm, measured voice. The children learned early that faith was not optional. It was the foundation of everything. Their mother, Eliza Davison Rockefeller's influence lived on strongly through John. She had taught him to tithe, to give away at least 10% of every dollar earned, and he passed that discipline to his own children. Chores were mandatory and paid in small amounts. Sharpening pencils earned 10 cents. Killing flies brought 2 cents. Practicing music fetched 5 cents. Chopping wood paid 15 cents an hour. John wanted his children to understand the value of work and the dignity of earning money honestly. Even Junior, the heir to an empire, mowed lawns and did household tasks for pocket money. Sundays were sacred. The entire family attended church, often the Euclid Avenue Baptist Church, where John taught Sunday school for decades. He was no distant figurehead. He arrived early, sometimes helped as janitor, and poured himself into lessons for young boys. His favorite hymn, tunes he would hum quietly to himself while walking or driving. Alcohol and tobacco were forbidden in the house. Temperance was non-negotiable, a stance said he supported as a founding member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Despite the strict rules, the home was filled with warmth and laughter. John had a surprising playful side. He invented games for the children, told stories, and joined them in backyard baseball or simple picnics. One favorite family ritual involved dime lessons. John would hand out shiny dimes to neighborhood children he met, encouraging them to save and invest wisely, the same lesson he lived by. The daughters Bessie, Alta, and Edith grew up with strong personalities. Bessie was intellectual and later married into another prominent family. Alta became known for her quiet generosity. Edith was artistic and passionate, though her life would later include personal struggles and a high-profile divorce. Their father treated them with respect and affection, never diminishing their importance because they were girls. Yet the quiet pressure of the Rockefeller name weighed on all of them. Junior, the only son, carried the heaviest expectation. From a young age, he sensed he would one day inherit not just wealth, but responsibility for the family's reputation and fortune. John was careful not to push too hard. He never barked orders or demanded perfection. Instead, he led by example and gentle guidance. He had a genius with children, Junior would later recall. He never told us what to do or not to do. He was one with us. As the 1880s progressed and Standard Oil's power grew, the family moved to New York City. The pressures of public scrutiny intensified. Newspapers began painting John as a heartless monopolist. Cartoons depicted him as an octopus strangling the nation. The children heard whispers at school and in social circles. "Is your father really that evil man?" classmates sometimes asked. John shielded them as best he could. He taught them that success invites envy and character matters more than public opinion. The growth of a large business is merely the survival of the fittest, he would say, echoing a social Darwinist view common in his era, yet he balanced it with deep Christian charity. Philanthropy was not an afterthought, it was woven into daily life. From his first job, earning $45 a year as a teenager, John had given to his church and to the poor. As his fortune exploded, so did his giving, but always systematically. He kept meticulous records, just as he did in business. Every donation was evaluated for its potential to create lasting good, not temporary relief.